Let's talk about Chapter 18. Chapter 18 is all about activity-based costing. This textbook or this semester, we do a lot of things with cost allocation. Cost allocation is not at all a difficult topic. You have done cost allocation before in your life if you've gone out to eat and split the meal or split the tab. But sometimes the problems can be long, and sometimes you get kind of lost in the weeds instead of looking at the big picture. So I just want to remind you that we have direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Those are our costs of the product. Okay. A lot of times the problem will simply, especially in this chapter, only ask for the manufacturing overhead. I will say that I have got tripped up on this quite a bit, but sometimes the problem will ask for manufacturing costs. Okay, and manufacturing costs are all the costs to manufacture. So manufacturing costs would be your direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. Whereas manufacturing overhead is just one of them. So really pay attention to the problem to ask to see if it asks for manufacturing costs, which is the total of all three, or simply manufacturing overhead. So we're going to do a problem, and this problem really only deals with manufacturing overhead. So we're not dealing with manufacturing costs. All right, so there are different ways that you can apply manufacturing overhead. So if you recall, let's say I have a plant that makes shirts and a plant that makes pants, okay? And I know how much direct materials goes into each shirt because I can keep track of the yardage. I know how much direct materials goes into the pants because I can keep track of the yardage. I know how much direct labor goes into each shirt because I can keep track of the time, and I know how much direct labor goes into the pants because I can keep track of the time. However, I know that I have rent for the factory, I have real estate taxes on the factory, I have a supervisor's salary, I have electricity, I have a lot of things that are overhead for the factory that I need to somehow split between shirt and pants in some method. Well, a lot of people would say, well, if I made 20 shirts and I have 40 pants, then the pants should get more. In fact, I have 60 items, and so I should just take my overhead and divide it by the 60 items. And that is certainly a valid way to do it. However, what if the pants take a quarter of the time to make that shirts do? In which case we may say, well, we should allocate it based on the time it takes to make it. So all of these are ways to allocate overhead. Can they be wrong? Sure, they can be wrong. So if you went out to supper and you were going to decide you're going to split the tip, I think there's 5 of you here, and 4 of you ordered a meal and you indeed only ordered water, and we've decided to split the tip 5 ways, I think you would say, hey, that's not fair, that's not right, that we're splitting the tip 5 ways when I only ordered water. However, you may come up with a better way of doing it, of saying, all right, let's split the tip based on for every $10 of meal that you had, you throw in $1 or $2 for the tip. In that way, you're allocating the tip based on meal cost, which I think we would all agree is possibly a very valid way to split the tip. We could even go back and decide that we're all going to order our meals together on one ticket and then split the meal cost itself, including the tip. And again, if you only had water and somebody else had a $100 meal item, you certainly don't want to split the tip 5 ways. So can it be wrong? Sure. But can you still allocate it based on it? Yeah, we could split it 5 ways very easily. So our goal is to try to get this the most accurate cost possible. So this chapter talks about a plant-wide rate, a divisional rate, and an activity-based costing rate. All that means is how many overheads are we going to have. So let's say that in our shirts and pants, I said the first one is rent. Okay, so I'm going to split the rent between the the shirt and the pants product line. So the rent for the year, the rent for the month, whatever time period we're doing it. We usually deal with a year and then divide it by 12 because of property taxes may only be received in 2 months, July and or June and September or whenever they are. So it would kind of make the shirts and pants I made in those 2 months kind of high, artificially high. We also have electricity that varies, and I really don't want to penalize somebody for being made in a very hot summer month versus another shirt that was done during the year. So generally our overhead costs are allocated on a yearly basis. So my 20 and 40 items, pretend there are 20,000 and 40,000 items instead of 20 and 40, but we'll just deal with the 20 and 40. And so I'm going to make my numbers pretty simplistic. But let's say rent is $100. I need to allocate rent. So I could just do rent 50-50, and so I have $50 and $50. Okay, but you may say that's not fair. How could I allocate rent? Well, I could notice I could take the $100 of rent divided by the 60 items and multiply it times the 20 of the shirt. So this one's going to get 33% of the cost, and I'm going to have 4/6 go to the pants. That's one way of allocating it. Or you may also say I want to allocate it based on square footage of the assembly line. So let's say the shirt's assembly line takes a lot of space, and let's say the space that the shirt takes is 500 square feet, and the pants only take 200 square feet. So now I have 500 plus 200 is 700. So this one's going to get 5/7 individual divided by the total times the cost you want to allocate. And this one's going to get 2/7. So individual divided by the total times the cost you want to allocate. So in all these cases, this better add up to $100 that I'm allocating. So that's all it is in allocation. Okay, so in this particular problem, I'm going to delete all of this. If I wanted to use a single wide, okay, so what I would do is I'd take my overhead. This can either be estimated overhead if I want to allocate it throughout the year because I need to know the cost, or I can wait till the end of the year and do it if I'm just going to compare two departments and I don't need to charge out the product to a person or need to know the information as I go along. But notice the total overhead for the year is $507,150. Hopefully you can see that. A little bigger. Okay, and then I would take an allocation base. A lot of times in a single wide allocation base, so I'm going to have my estimated overhead or my manufacturing overhead, whether it's estimated or actual, divided by my base. Your base is whatever makes sense to apply this based on. So in my case, when I did it 50-50, I did it based on the number of product lines. When I had 20 shirts and 40 pants and I did it by 60, I'd allocate it based on the number of products. Here's some activities. We can have machine hours, number of setups, number of parts, etc., etc. I'm going to say my base is direct labor hours, okay? This problem doesn't give us direct labor hours, so I'm going to have to make it up, but let's pretend the numbers in actually, let's assume my base is machine hours. That'll be a lot easier. Okay, and so I have 3240 machine hours, okay, and so I'm going to have my estimated or my overhead divided by my base of machine hours, and that's going to be $156.52 per machine hour. Okay, so now I have three products. I have alpha, I have beta, and I have omega. Okay, and again, I don't know my direct materials in this problem. I don't know my direct labor in this problem. It doesn't give it to me. So I don't know those numbers. So if the problem asks for total manufacturing costs, I would need to be given more information. But what I want to know is the overhead. So I have 156.52 per machine hour, and I see the alpha had 1440 machine hours. So it's going to get 25,400. dollars worth of cost. Let's see if I can get this a little bit too. Okay, and I know that Beta is going to get 156, and they had 1080 machine hours, so they get 20. It's got to be wrong there. Type in the right number. Okay, 169, and I know that Omega has 720. Okay, so now I'm just going to double check that I've allocated all the overhead, because it should total up to 507,150. And I get it. So if I want the total product cost, I would add those numbers. That is a single wide. In a departmental one, the activity may move through 2 departments. So I will have the overhead in Department A and the overhead in Department B, and one I may allocate on machine hours, and then the next department I might add over labor hours or something that makes sense for that department, because I certainly don't want to allocate overhead based on labor hours if I have a toxic work environment and I only have machines working on the product. So therefore, every product gets $0 of overhead, since it has no direct labor. So you want to allocate the cost based on the activity that causes it. Okay, so now this is a single wide. So sometimes though I have overhead that is used differently. So for instance, if I have a supervisor, we may say, gee, I should allocate that supervisor salary. Let's go back to my pants and shirts. Okay, so I have my supervisor salary, and I may say, gee, I should allocate supervisor salary to these 2 products based on the number of employees they have. So if the shirts have 10 employees and the pants have 2 employees, this one should get individual divided by the total. Again, it's just a ratio. Should get 10/12 of the supervisor salary. If I have rent, let's go back here. Just delete this. If I have rent, and I have, I'm going to allocate it based on square footage, and this one has 500 square foot, and this one has 200 square foot. This one's going to get 5/7 of the cost. This one's going to get 2/7 of the cost. So notice, instead of one overhead item, I'm going to have as many overhead items as I want to allocate differently. Okay, so in this case, instead of one overhead of 507,150, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 overheads that are going to be allocated differently. So production costs, I'm going to allocate based on machine hours. So let me kind of get this spreadsheet set up a little bit, and then I'll show you the solution on it. So let me pause this for a second. Okay, so here I have all my overhead items, and now I have to decide how I'm going to allocate it. Well, the problem with activity-based costing, the difficulty in activity-based costing is not in a homework problem. The difficulty is in when you're really truly implementing it, is figuring out what is the driver of the cost. In a homework problem, they basically have to give it to you. So my production is going to be allocated based on machine hours, and I have 3240 machine hours. I'm getting it straight from here. My setup is going to be based on number of setups, so 550. So if you need to know what a setup is let's pretend that I have a machine that if you've ever used a table saw, let's pretend you have a table saw there. If you ever have a table saw, if you want a 2-inch piece of wood cut, you have to move the saw. It holds the board in place. So I need to move it over so I can cut a 2-inch piece. So I'm going to set it up, my guide 2 inches away to cut the 2-inch piece. So let's say I have one piece of furniture I'm building that needs 10 2-inch pieces. I have to set up that table saw once because all of them are 2 inches. Whereas the next one, I need a 2-inch piece followed by a 3-inch piece followed by a 4-inch piece followed by a 5-inch piece. In other words, I have to set up the table saw 4 times for the second table because I have all these different pieces. So some products will require a different number of setups. So alpha has a 75 setups that they have to have. Beta has 165 setups, and omega has 310 setups. So again, the more in my table saw example was pretty simple, but notice it had one product had one setup and one product had 4 or 5 setups. So if I have people who I have to hire to do these setups, it is costing money to do a setup. My materials handling is based on the number of parts. So I have a total of 325 parts. And then I have, oh, and by the way, materials handling, another way a lot of business do materials handling is by weight, because think of a forklift operator is in this cost. A forklift operator, it has to go and move the materials around, so based on weight, but sometimes the number of parts, because the parts are in different locations, so somebody actually has to go get the parts and bring them together. So if an item has 180 parts and you're the only person working on it, you're running to 180 places to get it. And I'm kind of over dramatizing this a bit, but another one has 80, etc., etc. Inspection is based on the number of inspection hours, so I have 1,200. So notice I'm not just making one product, I'm inspecting the product. So if I have a very important item that can't go bad, so I spend a lot of time inspecting it, or I have a lot of inspections along the process of manufacturing, etc., but the total inspection time is hours. And then product engineering. Sometimes companies make engineering actually a direct cost, and so I'll get it in it. But remember, I only engineer it once, and then I make it. So I kind of want to spread the engineering hours over all of the products that I made. So I have 440. Okay. There's really no reason to total this up because you cannot add hours to setups, etc., etc. So now I simply do is divide. So I have 259 divided by my number of machine hours, etc. So, hold on. So I put dollar signs in front of this to make you know they're dollars, and then I didn't in front of this. So one thing I always do, so I don't get messed up, it's per machine hour. I put the per there. So now I just have to take each one of these numbers divided by the second column. Okay, so this is my cost driver. So this one is per setup, this one is per part, this one is per inspection hour, and this one is per engineering hour. Okay, so now I have my 3 products. I have alpha, beta, and omega, and I have my direct materials. Actually, I'm going to just do them up here. I have my direct materials, which I don't know, my direct labor, which I don't know, and now instead of 1 overhead, I have 5. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I've got manufacturing overhead for production. I'll just copy these down. Okay, I'm going to have manufacturing overhead production, setup, material handling, inspection, and product engineering. Okay, and I know that's what's going to go to alpha is $80 per machine hour, and alpha has 1440 machine hours. For beta, it's going to be $80 per machine hour, and beta has 1080. And then I have for $80 per machine hour times 720. So that is my total of my production. So if I add these up, it should add up to 259,200. And I'm going to go through and do the same thing for every single one of this one. So this one will be $100 per setup times 75. Okay. And et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to pause this while I fill. Okay. So I've done this with all of them. So let me go to the production and engineering. I have 280, so 280 times 125 is 35, etc., etc. So now remember, this right here, this column is alpha. This column here is beta. Make it green. And this column with the white is omega. So the first question that you have to do is say how much overhead gets to each product line, and that's these numbers. Okay. And if you print out this on your Moodle, you can see the solution is attached, and I'm going to bring up the solution in just a second. But the next question might ask is how much overhead is per unit. Now again, I wish they had given you direct materials and direct labor so they could ask you what is the total cost per unit. I'm only going to have manufacturing overhead costs per unit. I'm going to delete this one right there, and I'm going to write down the number of units. So A has 1,800 units, Beta has 1,350 units, and C has 900 units. So my manufacturing overhead cost per unit is $99.81. For Beta, it's $125.41 and $175.78. Okay, so now I'm going to pause and go to the actual solution. So you can see that they have the same $99.81, $125.41, and $75.78. So what are the questions? The questions in it says determine the activity rate for every activity. So $80 per machine hour, $100 per setup. So I had that in my answer. Right here, $80 per machine hour. So have your solution there in front of you. Remember, if you print off this, it has the solution attached. 80 per machine hour, 100 per setup, 30 per part, $50 per inspection hour, 280 per engineering hour. And then I have my 99, 81, 125, and 175.78. So that is the activity, determine the total, this line, and the per unit activity, this line, for each of the products. All right, so let me get to the other one. Okay, and so notice how they set it up. It's same but a little bit different. But now I have the costs, and the costs are very much different than what I would have if I had a single overhead rate. I don't know if you recall those, but let me kind of bring it up again here. If I had a single overhead rate and I simply did the entire amount of overhead divided by machine hours, so I had 3420 machine hours, is that right? Yeah. I had 156.53 per machine hour, and so if I had just had overhead, let's go over here, so I have 156.53 times, look at the overhead cost difference. Here I would have allocated in a plant-wide one overhead, all my overhead divided by one base, would have got 225,400. Okay, so look at the difference. And this is just overhead because the direct material and direct labor would have been the same whether I used a single one or activity-based costing. So just look at the difference of that divided by my number of units. So I would have thought it cost 125 when it only cost 99.81. So depending on our competition, how close we're selling them for. Look, this one's about the same, so this one wouldn't have mattered, but the other two are kind of, this one actually costs less than we thought it did, and this one actually costs more. So we have better information. Again, this is plant-wide right here, and this is activity-based costing. I hope that helps.